Okay, I hope you've enjoyed your lunch, and we're ready to start our program for today. Normally I start with a military recognition, but today I'm going to start with recognizing all of the ladies who have shown up for our luncheon and support the Gray Eagle. Some are spouses, some are pilots, some are guests, some are young aviators, and Melanie Jarvie is here, past president. So I would like to recognize all the ladies. You may stand up if you want to. You can wave, whatever your want. But we do thank you for the diversity you bring to our group. Thank you so much. All right, how many people here served in the United States military? Thank you. I want to thank Cheryl Guth, Cindy Dawson, Ruthie Henson is here today, helping at the table, and we appreciate all of their helps. Jock's over there doing his thing, filming, and we thank him for that. We've got past President Bob Hoke here, and yay, Bob. As you know, it's all his fault that I'm here. And Steve Fryer, Bill Rose is past president, another past president here for the Gray Eagles. We thank all of you all. And today, we're going to pay special tribute to Linda Matthews. Where are you? Linda, please stand up. Now, for you don't know what Linda does, I actually at one time was on the Snowball Express board, and we dealt with children who had lost their spouses and their parents in the war. And so Linda, that's what her position is auxiliary coordinator for the Gray Eagles. And she has served that well. Some of the stories where she reaches out and aids the surviving spouse, the children, sometimes even the grandchildren. Very difficult job to do, and she has served our board very well, and due to multiple reasons, mostly family, her own family, she has elected to resign that position, and we are now obviously seeking a new auxiliary coordinator. But once again, another round of applause for Linda Matthews. Thank you so much. Real quick, Bill Shirley passed away not too long ago, maybe 5 weeks ago, but his service is being held in Grapevine, Texas, August the 5th at 11 to 1 p.m. Grand Hall of Grapevine. If you want more details on that, just give me a call or talk to me later today. How many people here visit the APA website? Okay, cool new website. It's awesome. So I don't know if I'm stealing your thunder or not, but boy, I figure you're going to talk about other stuff. But it's a nice new website, very inviting to the eyes, and very friendly to use. So encourage you to take advantage of that. If you're interested in the cruise, I think they have a few staterooms left. Last I heard they had 4, and that's September 8th through 15th. Vicki McGowan is heading that up. If you are interested and you don't know who Vicki is, just give me a call. I'll help you with that. Today's my last day here as your Southern Area Director. I want to thank you very much for all the support, all these years of doing this. And it's been amazing. It's been amazing. How nice. I just got through saying to somebody, two of them wore this shirt here today, and I went, I want that shirt. All right, now for the big surprise, which I think everybody knows by now. Taking my place is going to be your favorite Marine. Where are you? Charlie Savage. Captain Charlie Savage.
And there are going to be absolutely zero changes to what we've been doing.
And I want to recognize Bob Lines for his help with Deputy Area Director. And thank you, Bob, for all your help, all your ideas. It's been a real pleasure to get to work with them, and we are looking for one more Deputy Area Director now, so anybody who wants to be involved, just talk to me about that. And that's it. At this point, we'll turn the program over to the president of the APA, and let's give the APA a hand because of all their support through the years. I actually did not know this until recently, but the Gray Eagles is actually older than the APA. So it's been a wonderful relationship, and we thank you. But without further ado, Captain Ed Sicher, President of the APA.
All right, hold on, let me try to get these slides going here. I think we need to change the input. Whoever has the slides, the control over the television, if they could bring the slides up. When I was asked to speak here, first of all, thank you very much for the invite. I appreciate it. Charlie, congratulations. I think the Gray Eagles is a wonderful organization. I spoke a little, oh boy, now I get to figure it out. I spoke a little about the importance of mentorship last time I was here. And the Gray Eagles does a great job of doing that. Let's see, Fubo, no, where's my input? All right, let's see. This is why I have a 12-year-old. No signal. Ah, man. Yeah, we'll try it on 2. All right. We're going to keep going through it by process of elimination. Ooh, you guys are smarter than I am. All right. Let me see if I can get it in slideshow format. Let's see. And slideshow from the beginning. It's still showing it, isn't it? I don't know what's it doing. Would you like to reduce mouse pointer lag on TV? Oh boy. Let's see.
You get it all set up and then it doesn't work.
All right, we're gonna have to do it without the slides, guys. All right, that's all right. I'm ready to do it. Okay. When I had to put these slides together, I had to think, what do you guys want to hear about? Of course, 2 things come to mind. One's the contract, and the second, of course, is age 67, being the Gray Eagles. So I'm prepared to speak on both of them. Let me start from the beginning. APA is an entirely different organization than I think many of you remember. When a lot of us started out back in the 90s or the 80s, I mean, we had a small organization. There was probably 20 people there. We had just moved into our building in the 90s, and it was, I think, $10-20 million a year operation. Well, we're running closer to 60 to 70 million a year right now. There's 100 employees in the building. We spend almost $2 million a year, the budget that we had in the early 90s, just on IT, just on computers and IT systems. So this organization has grown extremely big. We have a $2 million, over $2 million a year PAC, Political Action Committee, up in Washington. So this organization, as it's grown with the pilots, has also developed a bigger and a bigger footprint, both here and in Washington. And also, as you know, we've got two different spectrums of pilots. We've got our pilots that are ready to retire. There's a big bubble between 58 and 65. And then we've got a ton of people, over 1,500 a month, coming in on the back end to try to backfill. So, you know, we're talking Generation Xers, Millennials. I don't understand any of them, but it's just the demographics at APA is rapidly changing. So where have we been? This is actually almost the 1 year point of my term as president. I have no idea why I volunteered for this. Ask my wife, and she's going to ask me that question every day too. But I want to take you back to where we were at when I did take over. Now remember, I was a Miami chairman and a Miami vice chairman before that. So I was on the board of directors for quite a while. But what possessed me to take this position, I don't know. In any case, we had already been in negotiations last July when I took the position as president for 3.5 years. You guys know how difficult it is to negotiate with, I guess, what you would call a confrontational management team under the RLA. At the end of the day, if they don't want to give you something, they just keep saying no, and all they got to do is make it look like they're not stalling at the table by offering you a bone here or a bone there, and they could drag negotiations out 5-10 years easy, and it's not a quote-unquote impasse. So 3.5 years into it, last year in July when I took over, we were at a point where we had made very little progress, especially on quality of life issues. Now, Robert Isom and Parker, when their team took over, during COVID, they offered us some pay raises. I don't know if you guys remember that. It was a 3-2-2. It was worth $1 billion over the course of 3 years. There was almost no quality of life improvements. And so while Ferguson was in office, it was a flat out no. And so, and obviously in retrospect, that looks like the right decision. But remember, we're in the middle of COVID at that time. We don't even know if the airline's gonna survive. So it was the airline's calculated bet that if they went ahead and they gave us what little they were gonna give us then, they'd lock us out for another 4 or 5 years under the RLA, and they'd be able to proceed with a cost advantage on their competitors. Let's fast forward, because we came through COVID. The board of directors had what they called a targeted approach because they had winnowed down their requests. And by October of last year, now the third negotiating committee that we had formed under this new I guess, attempt to get a contract in, was at the table trying to get an AIP turned into a TA at the very end of October before the new board took over. And the amount of the contract, what they were offering us, had jumped from the $1 to $2 billion. Now we're up to just over $2 billion. We were going to take a 643, if you could remember, on a 3-year contract with pay rates at 643. There was very little quality of life improvements. And at that point, you know, welcome to office, Ed Sicher. You know, this is the job you volunteered for. Thank you very little. At that point, I think that it's important to know that I had reached out to the other union presidents at United, at Delta, at Alaska, Southwest Airlines. I talked to these guys on almost a weekly basis, and this is something that the APA had not been very good at doing in the past, but we got very good at it. And the other airlines, because just by virtue of the fact everybody was in negotiations at the same time, ended up paying dividends for us. Alaska Airlines was at the table first, and they wanted to know, you know, what's in the offer, because you know that if we're just talking as union leaders, management has got their fingers so far into the pie with each other. They know everything. And Will McQuillan, the Alaska guy, called me up and says, you know, my management's got your proposed TA here at the table, and I don't know if it's real or not. Can you give me some insight? So this is the kind of thing that goes on. This is the battle that we fight as unions against the industry. They may not be the same airline. The execs may hate each other, but when it comes time to putting labor down, they cooperate. They're very, very good at it. So Alaska ended up getting a lot of quality of life improvements, and we moved forward into October, and at that point the board was left with this 643. That was what we were going to offer them. Then we had increased to a 1264. Well, at the time, as you know now, inflation was running at an all-time high. We've got the millennials coming in, and they're saying, hey, I can't do this, I can't do that. By the way, the company decided, because they were so short-manned coming out of COVID, this was an absolute supply-driven process right now. If they could sell a seat, they would sell a seat, and they could set the price on it because there were hordes coming to travel coming post-COVID. So at that point, by the way, we had a change from Parker to ISOM. And as you know, Doug Parker was saying we're going to be industry leading, we can afford to pay our pilots industry leading rates. Doug Parker was a magician at getting everybody to believe in what he wanted them to believe in. And he was very good at mergers and acquisitions, and that team that he had been with now for 30 years, Steenland from Northwest, ISOM, Kirby, Parker, Kerr, they had been together 30 years. These guys knew each other, they knew how they operated. I mean, Steve Johnson is a lecturing professor on mergers and acquisitions out at Berkeley's think tank. This is the kind of lawyers that you're playing against. So as a union, we're completely outgunned. It's like sending your high school champion team up against, you know, an NFL pro team that's about to go to the Super Bowl. But we do it every time, and you know, when we do get some victories, we're even more proud of it. But at that point, we knew that when this changed from Parker to ISOM stopped talking about industry leading. He talked about industry matching. And in fact, when Delta inked their contract last October, that was one of those things we knew. American Airlines wasn't going to give us much at the table. They had been absolutely intransigent, and our only option at that point was to pattern bargain on top of Delta. Delta's got an entirely different management team, and I want to bookmark that because it's important that everybody understand this. Ed Bastian is their CEO, and they are not confrontational with their pilots. They actually listen to their pilots. Their pilots are the frontline leader. Now, he's got some built-in advantages. The flight attendants aren't unionized. He's running excellent margins, so he makes more money per ticket than any other airline. He's got a lower headcount per flight hour than any other airline. So Ed Bastian is, you know, walks on water as far as airline CEOs go, but I think it was a calculated bet on his part to go ahead and say, we're going to pay our pilots what we think they're worth. Let the other airlines figure out how to do it. Because he knew that United and American, as far as the majors go, aren't running the same margins that Delta's running. By the way, let me back up. When this team took over American Airlines in 2013, we were running some not bad margins, but I'm telling you, Crandall, as much of an asshole as he was, left the airline in pretty good shape back in the 90s. We had 18% reserve headcount. Right now we're running 33%. How'd that work for you over the last 10 years? We also were running an average of 10 to 12 hours per airplane per day. Right now we're down to 9. So these numbers, when you multiply them times, like for instance the 930, 940 airplanes we have in our fleet, add up to big hours and super poor metrics. So as successful as Parker's team had been at cobbling together airlines and starting together with America West, we've got a management team on the other side of this table that really hasn't proven that it knows how to run an airline. It could put one together, it can get Wall Street to finance it, but when it comes to actually running an airline, they're choking. They're not having as easy of a time. And this has been our biggest challenge at the table, because when I entered these things back in July, we set out on a calculated comm campaign back to the point. I've got $2 million to spend on IT. I've got a few $1,000,000, if not more, to spend on a PR campaign. I've got $2 million to spend in Washington on a political action campaign, and we're cobbling this all together, and what's our message? You know, what message do we bring? How do we get this management team that is so, I don't know if you would call it arrogant, but they're certainly confident, overconfident in their ability to run an airline? How do we get these guys to come to the table and make this a better airline? Because as you guys know, you guys have been with this airline sometimes 35, 40 years. This is our airline. The execs come and go. How many have we been through in the last 20 or 30 years? It's like a revolving door up there. They take their money, they run. We paid Horton $20 million to go away, right? But we're here, and we have a vested interest in making this an airline that actually works. Otherwise, all we're doing is facing the next inevitable bankruptcy. So that's been our challenge over the last year, is getting these guys to actually listen to us, because there are points where, as you know, as pilots, we know what makes the operation work, and we certainly know what doesn't make the operation work. And the less they listen to our pilots, the more captain's authority they take away from us, the more they try to isolate us from the other work groups, the worse this airline runs. And it's just, it's a magic. I went back to some of those metrics that we have, because I keep holding Robert Isom accountable for those in the public. Let's just take the reserve headcount. Industry standard reserve headcount's 18 to 20%. When this management team took over American Airlines, going into bankruptcy, we were running 18%. We have 15,000 pilots on the property, and we're running a 33% fleet-wide headcount. This is after PBS was forced on us in bankruptcy, and PBS was supposed to prevent pilots from conflict bidding, because these pilots are they're laundering vacation days, they're bidding conflicts with training so that they drop trips. And once we get rid of this, we're going to drive that reserve headcount down to 12%. How did that work for them? It went from 18 to 33, not 18 down to 12. Well, multiply 13%, because I'm just going to give them 20 as a soft number. My mom always told me never do math in public. I always mess it up. But 13% times 15,000, and we're closing in on somewhere near to 2,000 pilots that are not really being utilized correctly. Now, you want to fly that airplane that's only sitting there 9 hours a day flying when it could be flying 11 or 12 like Crandall had them flying? What do? Put those 2,000 guys to work. That's lost revenue opportunity. This management team just canceled 6,000 flights in October and another 3,000 September and another 3,000 in October, because they don't have the people to fly them, and they don't have the airplanes to sell tickets on. But at the same time, we're trying as pilots to get them back to going, let's just get back to basics. How do we run this airline better? And you're going, all right, Sitch, that's not your job to run an airline. Nope, it's not my job to run an airline. But when the schedules are so unreliable that my senior pilots bid what they think they want to fly, and believe you me, there's not a whole lot of really good choices left out there. They show up to fly it. They think they're going to St. Thomas, and you send them to El Paso on a 3-leg day, they're pissed. They're pissed. That abrogates seniority. What use is it to be senior if you just go to work every day, roll the dice, and say, where am I going? When am I coming home? They worked more of us into our days off last year than ever before. Our fatigue rate is higher than it has historically ever been. So it's no longer fun to come to work at American Airlines. There is no benefit to seniority if you have no idea what you're going to do as a narrow body captain. Now, of course, the wide body guys are like hiding out on wide body, right? They're like, try to reassign me from Madrid. Where are you going to send me? Back to Dallas, right? So they don't really care about the work rules. They just wanted the pay, but they're scared to death of going to wide body. So what you see is this narrowing band of wide body captain just keeps getting smaller and smaller. And these FOs, if they are lucky enough to get on wide body FO at 9 or 10,000, they stay there all the way through. And I brought this up to Isom and to Johnson a number of times. I said, if you guys actually gave us some quality of life, it would be like it was back in the 90s. There was maybe a 1,000 seniority number band from the most junior captain to the most senior FO. I mean, the FOs are like, hey, why am I sitting over here as an FO when I could be making more money as a captain? Well, when he doesn't have to give up everything, when reserve becomes a way of life, not a transient passage for a few months, these guys go ahead and they upgrade. But the fact that our band is so wide is a testament to the fact that the scheduling is so bad and that we've lost track of our ability to control our lives. And that's not why we became airline pilots. I mean, if and I'll speak on your behalf, But I certainly didn't leave the military because I liked being gone to some war zone at Christmas. I mean, here I am, my best buddy's an airline pilot. He's got a place in the Keys, 2 boats out in front of it, and he takes June off. I'm like, I could see myself doing that. I could. Who would have known that I would have jumped over here and it would have been worse than the military? I think I'd rather be over in Afghanistan for Christmas right now after the schedules got so bad. But in any case, that's where we're at right now on bringing things to the table. So after 8 months since we reconstituted that negotiating team in October, we tried to get across to the airline, and we brought the same message to Washington, so the regulators are bringing it down. You may like them, you may hate them, but Congress, Buttigieg, these guys, I want them pressure and ice them to make your schedules reliable. Quit stranding our passengers. Quit selling tickets that you can't conceivably deliver a service on. This isn't a lottery. This is a terms of best faith for service. So that has been what we've done up in Washington. And you go, well, what are you talking about, Sitch? What do you mean? What's good for us and what's good for that? Well, I'll give you an example. On the narrow body side of the house, our trip trade has been locked down. Since last September, it has been locked down red. It's impossible for a guy to trade a 2-day trip for a 2-day trip if he's even lucky enough to find a 2-day trip. So the companies profiled us, they've told us, they've modeled our behavior, and they've modeled our absenteeism. So to make it more difficult to not show up, what they've done is increase the length of the trips to 4- and 5-day trips. By the way, it also helps them because they turn the soft time on their optimizer program down. They say, if there's gonna be some guy that goes to Barranquilla and he's got a layover for 30 hours, holy mackerel, he just flew 6-7 hours and we're gonna pay him $10.30? That ain't gonna happen. What we're gonna do is we're gonna glue a 3-day trip onto the back of that 2-day, and we're gonna fly him 7.5 hours a day so we can get that soft time out of him. So they minimize the soft time, put it down to 0, the trip length goes up to 5 days, and on those 3 days they're trying to get their pound of flesh out of our pilots. What happens is this guy's doing stupid things that no airline that really had a dedication to reliability would do. I'll give you an example. I had one of those trips last year where I was flying back and forth to Cancun and then up the coast, and twice in 5 days I came home from Cancun to Miami and I had 50 minutes connect time to get the airplane, park the jet, jump out, go through immigrations, go through customs, get to the other airplane, usually at D51, the longest walk I could find, and then get that thing ready to go in 50 minutes. And the FO's looking at me going, holy mackerel, we got 2 of these in 5 days. How are we gonna do it? I go, we're not. We can't. I mean, it just isn't gonna happen. So just be prepared to be reassigned. And so that's what happens. When they reassign us, because that schedule is so really ridiculous, it never really works out, they got us on the reassignment hook. And as you know, that's just a real short leash. But even using someone for reassignment is not efficient, because if I time out because I didn't get through in time, and instead of that flight from Cancun to Boston Miami to Boston, after I arrived at Cancun, they end up reassigning me, I've got to go into rest, I got to pull a reserve. The reserve is usually on a reserve availability period. It's impossible to utilize reserves effectively. But this company keeps going back to the well. We just need more reserves. If we have more guys ready to go, we're good to go. And I kind of found it a little funny that Bill Sherrod, as talented of a guy as he is, was here briefing on our new IOC, because it shows where the priority of the airline is. Instead of building a schedule that doesn't fall apart in the first place, they'll invest billions, and I'm not exaggerating that, that's not a million, that Sicher misspoke to $1 billion. They will invest billions in creating a system that puts Humpty Dumpty back together again over and over and over again as rapidly as possible, when all they need to do is build resilience and reliability into the schedule in the first place, and they won't have to put it back together as often. Obviously, there's going to be the unmitigated, unexpected times when this thing falls apart, but they're so concentrated right now on putting it back together when it falls apart, having that reserve ready to go, restricting the ability of a reserve to say no, reassigning pilots into flights that they don't want to fly, that they're not really stepping back from this whole thing and saying, holy mackerel, we're in the deep stall. As pilots, we know what it is to be in a stall, right? The airplane's not flying. So what do? You pull back on the stick, right? That makes it fly all the time. Just keep pulling back on the stick. And then the airplane shakes even more and starts to fall even more as it goes deeper into the stall. So what do? You pull back harder, right? That's what we all do when we start flying. And it's counterintuitive to just add power and unload. And that's what I've told Robert Isom, Steve Johnson, and Lucretia Gia across the table. You guys are in the deep stall. It's time to unload. When you're 13% above your reserve head count for industry standard, that's not the time to add more reserves. Go back to the beginning, figure out why in the hell are your schedules falling apart as much as they are. You've got to fix that problem and reduce your head count. Then you can start worrying about comparing your margins to everybody else, and we won't be arguing over whether or not you got the money to pay my pilots industry standard or not. Because that's what they're saying, we can't afford it. Well, sorry, we're a commodity. You don't end your business plan with the pilots. You don't say, I paid for my gates, I paid for my airplanes, I paid for my debt. Well, sorry, I don't have any money left. You guys are going to have to work for free this year, right? But that's the way that this company approaches labor negotiations. They pay what they have left. Instead of, we are major airline pilots, we've served our apprenticeship, we've gone through our careers, we are at the pinnacle of our careers, we're in our peak earning years, this is what it costs to go ahead and employ us. Start with that, and then figure out how many airplanes you can afford. Don't put us back into this whole business plan. So anyway, where are we at? We finally, after a lot of tooth pulling and trying to convince the company that they need to reduce the reserve head count, they need to reduce the length of the trips, they need to loosen up on trip trade lights, they need to go ahead and allow people who absolutely do not want to fly a trip the ability to not fly it. Because they're going to figure out a way to get out of that flight. You're not going to force that guy to fly. I got news for you. And when he doesn't fly or she doesn't fly that flight, you got to pull a reserve. Why not give him the option of flying? And you know what? He's probably going to pick another trip up somewhere else in that month because he's got a mortgage to pay. He's got kids in school. He may have 2 or 3 ex-wives. I don't know. But he's got a reason to make that money. Let him earn that money. But you can't force him. You know, in the military, the guys who were in the military, there's quite a few out there. I know you remember when we first went into the basic officer school, they told you that you're the officer. You can tell your enlisted troops to do something. You can order them to do something. You go, wow, I can order these guys. It's great. My dad was a master sergeant at the time, and he was just going, wow. But if you order somebody to do something, if you force them to do something against your will, be prepared for the 3 R's. Well, what are the 3 R's, Dad? Resistance, resentment, retaliation, right? I mean, that's just human nature. When we're forced to do something we don't want, it's amazing how reluctant, how it is almost impossible to get us to move. But instead of motivating pilots, this airline chooses to force them to fly. So this is the point right now, I feel, where we're at in these negotiations before I start talking about details. And oh, by the way, if I could have shown that slide, I would have told you, we're in a 7-day period where I'm not officially allowed to say I'm for it, against it, good or bad. I can give you the facts, but that's all I can do as a national officer. Now, if I were a board of director, and I don't see any here, I could put them up here, they could tell you what they think of it, but I can't. But in any case, we're at this point where I think we've got a pretty big package on the table that the board of directors is going to meet next Thursday to look over. It's called an AIP, an agreement in principle. They're going to say, do we want this AIP? And if they choose to pass it on to the membership, there'll be a 14-day period after that, after they evaluate it, where the members get to vote on it. We're going to do electronic voting. First the members evaluate it, then 14 days for them to vote on it. So we're really looking at about August. The pay date should start May 1st, which is one of those deals we got in there. Now, we were supposed to finish this whole approval process by August 1st in order to get the May 1st date, so that's still one of those things that's a moving piece in action. For those of you who have retired or who are on LTD, there's a lot of stuff in there that would be of interest to you. Last time I was up here, somebody asked me, do the retirees qualify for that retro pay, which they're not calling retro pay. They're calling it ratification bonus. And it's got some kind of tax consequences. If I were a tax lawyer, I'd understand it. but they don't want to have to go back and restate their earnings for 2020, 2021, and 2022. So they'd rather just pay you off right now with that same amount of money in 2023 and call it a ratification bonus. But it's 4414 for any of your W-2 wages that you earned in 2020, 2021, 2022. Now there's some caveats to that. If you were on long-term disability and you weren't actually producing for the company, I'm not sure if your income will qualify for part of that. And there's also some relief that we had to give them because they say, we don't even know where our retirees are at. How can we pay them? So we gave them some ability. Don't worry, when they find out they're getting a check, they'll find you. So I think that's true, don't you think? Yes, ma'am.
What about VPLOA?
Yeah, the VPLOA guys were supposed to be included. I don't have that language in front of me, and that was still being argued over. They should qualify for it because technically they should have been flying. They were being paid to be idle. But I'm going to wait until the board of directors goes ahead. That language right now, what they're doing is they're saying, hey, we meant for those guys to be included, and then the contract language either does or does not include those. But BPLOA, what I was briefed on, should be included. All right, but we're going to see. 4414, and then unfortunately for this year, there was no retro given for January, February, March, and April. And then May 1st starts the 23.1, and they give you this little approximation sign on there because what we tried to do in the negotiations was get off of the pay banding method and get to an equipment pay. And the board of directors spent more time arguing about this than probably 99% of everything else in that contract. The reasoning is pretty simple. If the airline decides to purchase a different kind of airplane, whatever, Zoom, supersonic, whatever it is, or just buy something they already have, we want to be able to negotiate a rate for it. We don't want them to be able to just slide it in, group 2, there you go. Wait, hey, wait. We want to be able to negotiate. So this whole pay banding method is something that they're insistent upon, and maybe not so much to go ahead and preclude negotiations if other airplanes are at it, but they're looking at it from the point of view that if they pay by equipment, you guys were around when the Group 3 airplanes were here, 7576, they're afraid that right now training is their bottleneck, and if all of a sudden we start paying the 321 XLR more than the 321 and more than the 737 MAX, that there's going to be a mass migration of people that run over to Airbus and jam up their training pipeline even more. I guess there's some validity to that, and that's why sometimes the pay rates look a little complicated. They banded them together. That put the 319 and 320 below the 321 rate. So part of the final end state negotiations was we're not taking pay rates that are less than Delta. So they had to move up. They had to bump up the 19 and the 20 pay rates. So they'll be a little higher than Delta's. The 321 will match, and there'll be an override pay given for the 321 Neo and XLR. And those override rates are another one of these sticking points because as you remember from the 7576, you could be on Group 3, but if you were a junior guy like me, all you did was go to Lima on the 75. I mean, you didn't go to Madrid or Barcelona or Milan or any of these great places until you were that top 15, 20%. And those guys, they had a death grip on that top 15%. They weren't moving. You might as well just go to a 777FO before you were ever going to get to that on a Group 3. And that's the way it's going to be on these 321 groups. We try to tell them, look, even though you're going to pay more for the XLR and the Neo, very few of those pilots will be able to hold those trips. But they didn't want to go ahead and complicate the programming of this system in order to go ahead and pay these guys for sit time at a Neo rate. So what they agreed to do is pay overrides on those airplanes, but those overrides were only going to pay for the block hours flown on those airplanes, sit time, vacation, everything else gets paid at the standard rate that guy's at for that pay band. Back to programming, if I can mention that. It was probably the biggest sticking point in these negotiations. I just told you that APA spends almost $2 million a year on IT and upgrading its system and profiling and looking at the schedules. Well, I think that's probably the same amount of money that AA, it's $50 billion in revenue a year, spends on their IT, because it's unforgivable that this company could say over and over again at the table, that's great, we'd love to try it, that's a good idea, Ed, but we can't program it. Excuse me? We can't program it. It would take us forever. The last contract we had coming out of bankruptcy, we had 62 unimplemented items, more than a decade. Now, I mean, the hidden part of that is some of those 62 items we didn't want. They were bad things for the pilots, so it wasn't like we were going to push them. But I guarantee you, if they could have programmed them, they would have programmed them. And here we are, 10 years later with 62 unimplemented items, and you got to wonder, what the heck, are we going to get half of what we want in this contract program before we're out of the woods on the 5-year point? So that's been a huge sticking point. I'm still not certain why American Airlines hasn't invested in its IT, but I can tell you that the FOSS system is programmed in like basic, computer language stuff I learned when I went to college back in the 80s. I mean, it's like, find a Fortran programmer. I don't even know if there's still one walking around, but that's what they need to go ahead and reprogram these systems. And instead of investing in something that they could bring up to speed, up to date, and change things quickly, they've chosen to just let it die on the vine. So I have no idea why. So this contract has been priced, and I don't put a whole lot of faith as a union leader in the valuations. Our ENFA does a really good job of modeling it and figuring out how much it's worth if the company keeps doing what it's doing now after we sign this agreement. But as you know, these guys are businessmen. They're in business for a reason. That's to make money. The minute you give them a new rule set, they change the game. So is it worth $8.5 billion? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe they'll figure out a way to mitigate $500 million of it. But just on its face value, if you take that for what it's worth, $8.5 billion divided by 15,000 pilots, once again, don't do public math, but we're somewhere in the ballpark of $133,000 a pilot a year. So it's quite a big pay raise. So at this point, we didn't get a lot of the quality of life issues in it that we wanted to, but there's a lot of money. There's a lot of money at stake, and the board of directors knows that, and those guys are sweating. They finally got to earn their keep as a board of director and vote yes or no on this thing. There'll be that upfront check of 4414 for the wide-body captains. It'll be somewhere around $120,000 lump sum. For our brand new FOs, it'll be somewhere in the neighborhood of $30,000 to $50,000, depending on how long they've been on the property. So that'll be a lump sum check up front, and then will come the pay raises. The 23% pay raise, like I said, it's about 23% because wide bodies sometimes get more. The narrow bodies, we're talking about a pay banding method. That'll take effect on May 1st. That'll carry us through to year 2. Date of signing will be May 1st from now on, and then we'll go 544, and that'll take us out the back end of this thing. So that's pretty much the gist of it. What didn't we get? Like I said, the retro hole for January, February, March, and April, we fought like hell for that. Sick accrual. We entered into this whole thing with industry trailing sick accrual of 5 hours a month, and you can't even use it to the next year. We're exiting this with industry trailing sick accrual at 5 hours a month. They sweetened the pot on some of it if you retire. Remember, some of our guys retired in December. They got 55 hours of sick in the bank, out the door. Sorry. Sucks to be you. Wish you were born in January. Your mom couldn't hold on to you. Give me my 55 hours. So I know, though that's how they treated it. But now at least you will get to tap into that accumulated bank when you retire and get the benefits of that 55 hours. There's an RHRA, which is a good deal for those who need the money for health care in retirement. So they'll be able to cash up to, on 60 cents on the dollar, 60% of the accumulated sick hours they have, up to $200,000 into an RHRA. And the company sees that as kind of an incentive to not burn up your sick in the last few years of your career. I had a slide, which if I could figure out how to work this thing, I would have showed you. But if I were to project forward onto this age 67 thing, because I've gotten quite a few hits on this. I get a few tomatoes thrown at me every day. Most of the members are against it, some are for it. I don't care where you're at on it. The board of directors deliberated on this, and it's the board of directors that makes their mind up, not Ed Sicher, by the way. So I got to pass the buck on this. 2016, we sat down, we had an annuitant, I hope I'm saying that correctly, from New York come on down. This is, remember, 2015 was right after we lost that A fund, and that was a huge blow. Guys, we held on to that A fund, by a thread all the way through the 2000s, all the way through the 90s, these guys worked on getting rid of that B scale. They finally did it the last time we negotiated a contract. Was that like 97? I mean, it was that long ago that we finished our last successful Section 6 negotiations. This is how close we are. Don't breathe too hard, or it could be another 25 years. But once they had gotten rid of the B scale, those B scalers wanted that A fund. That was their mother lode. That was their reward. And they got it, and they held on to it. And 9/11 hit. Then 2003 Moab hit. We gave up work rules. We gave up pay rates, 23%. How many guys did we furlough? 2,000 guys out of a seniority list that was up to about 8,000 at the time. So we held on to that A fund all the way to the bankruptcy. And we got into the bankruptcy. That was the first thing. You remember what happened, right? They said, liquidated PBGC, or Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. And this guy named Krugman, who was the chairman of the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, said, not so fast, Mr. Horton. You got $5 billion in the bank. I want you to fund those retirements before you get into the government. And that was the first big pause American Airlines had on their exit from bankruptcy plan, or I should say their self-exit from bankruptcy plan that went south. They had accumulated so much money, they felt they didn't care if the investors were on board or not. They didn't even need to issue the stock. Well, guess what? You got to pay off the pensions first. So what we did in 2015, long story made longer, is we said, how much is it going to cost to reinstate this A fund? Because we want it back. At the time, it was only $150 million underfunded, which in today's dollars, you go, geez, that's what the house next door costs, right? That's not that much money. But when we brought this annuitant down from New York, he told us differently. He said, you guys are never going to get this back. He goes, I do this for a living. I've never seen a defined benefit plan with such generous terms as this. And I know Parker. I pulled him up. I had my secretary look at all the speeches. There is no way this guy's going to agree to reinstate that plan for only $150 million. And I'll tell you why. So he went down the list of reasons why. He said, first of all, I've never seen a plan where you can pull a lump sum out up front. Okay, so who cares, right? That's the amount that you would have drawn out of the plan if you had taken it out in little pieces and the airline had actually made it insolvency to the point where you died. But the fact you could pull money out up front means the airline's got to pay you to your annuitized life expectancy. Sicher, why are you going off on this tangent? Where are you with this? And let me tell you, because he had the stats for retiring at age 60. And he said, it's a mystery because you guys start off healthier than the average population. Pilots in general are a lot healthier than the average population, but you die 1 year earlier than the average population. And he had his little graph up there. At that point, when we were retiring at 60, this is prior to 2007 in that new legislation, our average guy died at 78.5 years, and the average American lived to 79.5 years. So he goes, I don't know why you guys die quicker when you start off healthier. It could have to do with this, it could have to do with that, accumulating ionizing radiation, shift working, yada yada. But I can guarantee you this, that in general, the longer you work, the shorter you live. Those curves are going to cross somewhere. I don't know where, and it's going to take us a good 20 years to develop data on retirement at age 65, but we'll get it. For now, just know the average guy out there is not even going to make 78.5 at this point. I'm guessing it's going to be somewhere around 77.5. So that was the first data point the board took into account. Second data point, now that we are flying to age 65, I don't know if you guys knew this, and I wish I could show you this graph. I've got it printed out here. I could show you later. But the rate of sickness and disability goes up exponentially, and it doesn't go up at 64 when a guy says, hell, I got 1,000 hours of sick in the bank. I'm just not showing up to work next year. It starts going up at 59. Now, I'm 59, and I by no means feel like I've got this retirement in the bag yet. I don't know. Will I make it? Will I not? But by the time you get to 64 and a half, fully 1/3 of our pilots are on long-term disability or long-term sick. And I guarantee you one thing, you talk to any one of those guys, it's a surprise. None of them knew it was coming. It just happens. We get older. This is not sitting at a desk and moving numbers around a spreadsheet. This isn't going to court and maybe getting yourself ready to go and argue that big case. This is day after day, climbing in that airplane. You're in that metal tube moving at 500 miles an hour. You're going through multiple time zones. One day's early, one day's late. Some days you're waking up at 3 in the morning in Europe. The next day you're waking up at midnight. You don't know what time it is. That does not do a body good. And neither does it do good to sit up there at 35, 40,000 feet where you're taking 2 or 3 x-rays every time you take up there. Our leading cause of death on this seniority list, bar none, is cancer. Our ladies get breast cancer at an exorbitant rate by sucking up that radiation. So sitting around for another 2 years might just be the point where the curves cross. I mean, I'm hoping to save for retirement so I could actually retire. I don't want to save for retirement so that my kids get it. They'll spend all their time arguing over it and they'll piss it away in a year anyway. I want to enjoy it. So that was the message that the annuitant got. There was a couple other messages in there as to why it only cost $150. If you remember back in the 2000s, we had all you guys lobby your congressman for the Save Our Airlines thing, where we, in order to save the airline from bankruptcy, we were going to go ahead and assume a rate of return on our retirement that was not based on, remember the government long bond? It used to be like a 20-year government bond they would issue, and it was like gold. I mean, this is before the Republicans and Democrats started arguing over whether or not they're going to fund the government, right? We're back in the 2000s. But the point of the matter was that they stopped that long bond, and so what do you use as an assumed rate of return on your retirements? So we all lobbied our congressmen, and they allowed us to use corporate bond rate. And it wasn't even the AAA rate. It was like some corporate B bond rate that was returning 7%. What the heck does that have to do with the price of tea in China, Sitch? Well, this is what it has to do. You know, you've got to, as a company, put enough money in a retirement account so that you can project forward what you're gonna earn on that money so that when that guy actually needs it, it's there. And it's complicated. That's why annuitants do it. Well, in this case, by assuming 7%, instead of the real rate of return that we were getting on bonds back then, which is safe bonds, 2 to 3%, the airline had really drastically underfunded our retirement plans. It was more than 150. It was closing in on $1 billion, is what this guy figured out. And as soon as that rate reset, if we had that A fund reinstated, they would have to be pulling chunks of $300-400 million a year to bring that A fund up to fully funded, because it's got to be fully funded to be legal. And so at that point, the board said, okay, we're willing to give $150 million of improvements to get this back, but we don't have $1 billion. We don't have $1 billion. We're exiting bankruptcy. We're only getting $1.5 billion or something. So that was when they abandoned ship on reinstating that A fund. That was the whole story behind that. And it plays into the age 67 thing right now, because that message that they brought to us was, it's not free. You don't work for a couple more years for free. Still live to 80, 85 years old and enjoy the fruits of your labor. So the board may go ahead and re-poll. I wanted to re-poll last September on this, but it was right when this APA to ALPA thing was coming down, and Phil Comstock, our professional poller, said, you're a fool for tagging this question onto the back end of the APA to ALPA. Remember, our president can't. As a domicile chairman, I could do whatever I wanted to do. As president, I can't sneeze without asking my board of directors. And they said no. So they thought it was going to be a selective bias, that the people who would answer the APA to ALPA survey would not necessarily have an interest in age 67, nor would the people who could really give, a rat about the, APA to ALPA, would they go through that whole survey to get to the last question and answer it on age 67? So I know that there's probably some questions I know a few of you have asked me, but that's the story behind that. Right now, our Government Affairs Committee is against it. American is for, AA proper. United Airlines is against it. Kirby ran the numbers, and he had 33% of his guys at age 65 were on LTD or long-term sick, which is amazingly close to the number we have at a different airline. Delta's remained neutral. Bastion doesn't want to weigh in on it. And of course, Southwest is apples and oranges. They polled their pilots. It was somewhere around 67, 68% that were against, but they don't have wide-body international. Once you get to 7-3 captain, where do you go? 7-3 captain, right? So who cares? So it's a different story over there. So anyway, that's all I got for you. I'm here to answer questions if you want. Like I said, I can't say if it's a good thing or a bad thing on the TA. I may kind of slip in a foot stomper, but and hopefully it won't be recorded. But anyway, what you got back there? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell you, you guys should be proud of your work. This is obviously the best contract I've seen in 30 years.
Well, thanks. I can't say if it's a good one or a bad one, but it certainly is worth a lot of money. And it's been a long time since we've seen this kind of money being offered. This will put us ahead of inflation, 23%. The 23,544. It's going to put us ahead. For the first time, we're catching up to all those, I guess, death by 1,000 cuts that we've been taking over the last 20 years. And last time I went to the grocery store, orange juice was $8.50 a gallon. Like, you gotta be kidding me. No wonder my wife keeps, complaining and not giving her enough on groceries. But things have just gotten out of sight. I mean, remember when you retired, you were on the board of directors, right? You were our treasurer a while back, sir? Yes? I mean, a $1.1 million lump sum, you can not only buy the house next door, you could buy the whole block for $1.1 million, right? So what happened? I don't know what happened.
Well, your comments on retro, no matter what they say, looking back in the rear view mirror, it's clear. If you don't get retro, all you're doing is incentivizing the company to correct every negotiation. And I've seen contract after contract. It seems like
Sicher.
negotiation.
That is so true, and the data point on that is Delta back in October when I was talking to Jason Ambrosi before he became the Alpha Master MEC chair. He was actually somebody you can call up and he would answer the phone. Said that the NMB parked them. They had basically gotten what they were going to get out of Delta, and they still hadn't gotten the retro pay that we're talking about. And the NMB said, "You're not going to get another cent. You're going to go and you're going to bring this to your members, or I will park you until after next summer." And remember, this is last November. So, and Alpha, that was Alpha's experience with Delta. With Delta. SWAPA has a similar experience with the NMB, where, they're basically, all they see is dollars and cents and industry standard. So try to go there with a work rule and say, "Hey, I can't trade trips, Mr. Mediator, and dang it, I want to be able to trade trips." And he's like, "Well, don't you pick them in seniority order?" "Yeah, but. And you get no sympathy from these guys. The government agencies are not there to help you. It's like the IRS coming up and saying, "Hey, I'm here to help." "Oh, really? Really?" So I think that, as far as the magnitude of this, it's a lot more than American Airlines management wanted to pay. It's a lot more than they thought they were gonna have to pay. But it is, in the last 25 years I've been on the property, it's definitely the best deal I've seen come down since then. Can't advocate for or against. All right. Other questions? Yes, sir?
What has happened to the effort to merge APA and Alpha?
Okay, good question. First of all, let me put some perspective on it, because for all of APA's flaws and warts, it's democracy. I don't know one democracy that works without consternation, discord, arguing. So to assume that this is going to be a well-oiled, well-run machine with everybody on the same sheet of music is a fallacy. Okay, that being said, our regional pilots, sir, you got to understand, this generation that's coming around now is not like our generation. I started off as a flight engineer. My first year I made $17,800. I bid because there were more meals on this sequence than the other one. Really. Oh, by the way, my child support was like $11,000. So do the net on that, and you know why. I had 3 different cars that weren't worth $500 between the whole lot of them. Dirty underwear in all of them in different parking lots. Bradley, I had one in Chicago, and I had one in Miami. That's how we started off. This generation is getting $150,000 bonuses to sign on with a regional and stay. They're paying for hotels when they have to commute in. They're reimbursing them for training. So why do I say that? And what's that got to do with APA to Alpha? Well, most of those regional carriers are Alpha carriers. And these guys are too young and naive to understand that the reason they got all that stuff is because there's just a shortage. American Airlines is trying to keep them from attriting after spending $70,000 training them to another airline where they spend another $70,000 to train them. So they come in with a false sense of security in Mother Alpha. And so that was the driver behind the APA to Alpha thing. Plus, APA has had its warts, and we were ineffective at the negotiating table for 3.5 years. Well, let's put Alpha in there. They'll show them, right? Right, yeah, I know. And, you know, for us, for the guys here who have been around the block, and we've seen ALPA at its best and its worst, hey, ALPA advocated against maintaining the 1,500-hour rule. ALPA advocated for age 65. I mean, ALPA has been on the opposite side of a number of issues going back as far as I could remember. And the conflict of interest that's built into an organization that represents both regional and mainline pilots is just, at the start of the day, you got a flaw in the organization. Plus, there's the 1.85% dues, which is constant. They don't go down to 1% dues. I don't know what they do with all that money, but their budget's huge. APA would have gone ahead then and raised our dues from the Section 6 amount we're pulling in right now, about 60 million, 65 million, to 80 million. Then ALPA would have taken that dues money and out of their own kindness of their own heart, given us 22 million back. Oh, by the way, that building that we have, it's theirs. Our house in Washington, D.C., it's theirs. But don't worry, we can negotiate to make sure that we could use it again. And you sit there and you look at this stuff and you're like, okay, where's the good side? I mean, ALPA does have a very professional negotiating team. They have a toolbox of lawyers standing in line. These aren't like $50,000 a year lawyers. These are $850,000 a year lawyers. They're very good at what they do. So there are some absolute benefits to ALPA, but you know, in the big scheme of things, an independent union has a whole lot more flexibility. We operate on lighter feet. We can get to Washington and advocate for or against something like that. I don't have to poll my 40 different airlines and figure out where they're at on the issues. So the board of directors met. There was what I would consider to be a very slanted view of whether or not ALPA was good or bad. They were at a decision point where they had to either commit to continue negotiations or, you know, get off the pot and leave. And they decided not to do it. So the ALPA thing for now is dead. For now. They could do a card campaign if they want to. I don't think it's going to succeed. Put it this way, if you get a guy $100,000, $120,000 lump sum check, it's kind of hard to bite the hand that feeds it. It's going to be hard for them to get 50% of the guys to say, that's terrible, I should have got $140,000. ALPA would have got me $140, damn it, I want out. So we'll see what happens. So, all right, more questions, please. Yes, sir? Yeah, I wish I had the inside on that because I find it hard to believe that as soon as the ex-Boeing chief financial officer takes over on our board of directors, our 787 numbers are pushed back. Huh. Right. And also, this is during the same time frame that Robert Isom's telling me, Ed, if you agree, this is October, if you agree to this, I will be able to lock in my wide body orders and we will have more international flying. And you're just on the border of being a captain for the wide body, right? Just do it, just sign right now. So I think that in light of the fact that there's such a training bottleneck right now, and that we're losing so many of our wide body guys, he's recording me, so I'm gonna be done. But we couldn't put pilots in those airplanes even if we got them. To have airplanes delivered that we're paying for and that we don't have pilots trained to fly would be the ultimate sin on management's part. So I think that there was some type, and I don't know this, but there might have been some type of mutually beneficial solution. Boeing rolls their production to 787s going to somebody that can actually man them right now, and there's not too many airlines that can. And then we go ahead and get our training pipeline in order, get our check airmen squared away, get these, this unbelievable 850, 900 guys that are retiring every year in order, and then they're going to go ahead and they'll have actually somebody to fly it when it's delivered. But then again, this this management team has proven that it's more concentrated on a domestic operation with high frequency than they are on an international flag carrying operation. And you could bring that up. I brought that up with Johnson on the phone last week. I said, well, you guys are going down two different directions. Kirby, who he was complimenting, one of his original team, just bought a ton of wide-body aircraft, and you guys are going down the domestic route. I don't get it. Well, Scott Kirby's a very smart guy, and he did what was best for United Airlines, is what he said. Okay. So I don't know. I don't know where the future is. I can say that this airline team, this management team, has been very averse to investments in big airplanes. They'd rather do smaller airplanes, higher frequency. They feel like they're more competent or more comfortable maybe running a narrow body kind of operation. And I think the 777, you can see they're not putting a whole lot of emphasis on fixing them. We've got some issues, some ADs on the stabilizers. You know, those things, they're left dying on the vine right now. All right, any other questions?
Yeah.
Yep.
How far back is the retro going?
2020 wages. So at a 4% of your wages in 2020, 4% of your wages.
In 2020.
Yep, if you worked in 2021, 4%. And if you worked in 2022, 14%. 2020, yes sir. So, any other questions? I'm sure there's got to be a lot of them. Yes sir?
Well, just kind of a little question, but, you know, I was kind of wondering about the LPD. You said we weren't productive in producing any income. I kind of take comments.
That was their definition. Produce, you know, did they produce revenue, I think.
I don't think they heard the question.
Okay, the question was on LTD. So if you were on LTD for 2020, 2021, 22, will you be entitled to that 4, 4, and 14? I don't believe they're gonna take your LTD wages, what, you know, and there was an $8,000 cap for most of y'all back then, and multiply that times the, your 4, 4, 14. They did go ahead. They had not been honoring offsets because, you know, our LTD plan was toxic prior to this thing. For instance, the Social Security offset. You know, if you or your wife drew Social Security, they knocked it off the $8,000 you were going to receive.
I heard JetBlue was more generous. They contributed to their
401k.
401k.
Yeah.
And also they took it up to age 67 or something like that. They had
Yeah.
a higher note where they went LTD on. And the whole point is
Yeah.
just that I enjoy doing what I can do, and I'm luckily back doing things, but it's all volunteer work, you know.
Yeah.
I can't fly an airplane right now, but, you know, I help.
There was a lot of emphasis put on LTD in this contract, and you know, it's going up. They're going to go from 8,000 to 12,000, and the problem is it's not backwards looking. If you're already on it, you're on the plan that they bought the insurance for, not the one that they're going forward with. They're going to formally recognize the fact that those offsets, you know, are going to be taken away. They're not going to enforce them. And there's a couple other provisions on LTD that will make it a better deal. It's still not a good deal. I mean, you know, you just don't go from 20,000 or 30,000 a month gross down to 12,000 and not have some difficult decisions to make. It's unfortunate. You know, we're moving forward as fast as we can, but you know, realize it's just, I think it's going to be an iterative process to bring our guys up to the point where they're truly protected. So in the meantime, you got to have some other insurance plans outside of AA, so that if you do lose your license or you do become disabled, you're not having a fire sale.
From my day, it was all about the senior guys and protecting them and giving them their work.
Yeah.
So that's all I want out of
Yeah,
it.
we've tried to spread it around. You're going to take a look at this contract in a week and say, yes, it was successful, or no, it wasn't. It's difficult to get something for everybody, but LTD was one of the emphasis points, and it's improved quite a bit. Is there any other questions that I can answer for you guys right now? Feel free to come up and talk to me if you want off the record. Appreciate it, Alan. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, that's very enlightening, and given today's environment in the airline industry and the FAA and the air traffic control situation, I think for somehow them to have an AIP, an agreement in place, is absolutely miraculous, and where it goes from here and how the board handles that and presents it to the membership, we'll see. But thank you so much. If you had gotten to know Ed, if you knew Captain Ferguson from the previous talks that he's given, and then Ed, you can see the difference And I think the proof is in the pudding here that they got a deal. And Eric came in at a really tough time with COVID, and really no fault of his own, but at least now they've got something to go forward on. So I wish American Airlines is always the best. I know all of you do, and I hope they get the deal done the way that membership wants it. So there is a lady here today that I forgot to introduce, Karen Nicholson. If she would stand up, please. So, Karen works for the APA, and how these luncheons happen. She's after I've talked to Randy and arranged the date for the luncheon, then I call Karen, and she is the person that puts together the postcards, and she's a graphic designer for the APA. She sees to it that the postcards are all done, and she's just a tremendous aid. And I want to thank Bob Hoke for letting me, I'd call him up and I'd say, hey, how do we do this? I did that for so long, and then Jock, and of course Bruce, and you know, it's been so rewarding to be here. Cal Moreland called me yesterday, and you know, we end up talking for just a few minutes about what he needs to talk about. Then we talk about all kinds of things. That's been the real joy of being your area director, is re-engaging with you all. Some of you I had the privilege to fly with, a lot of you, and known over the years, and it's you know, it is a volunteer position, but it is very rewarding. So if anybody here wants to be involved with the Gray Eagles, you know, step up, and we would love to have you. That concludes the meeting. If anybody has any questions, anybody have any questions? Okay, that concludes the meeting. We're in a bar. Enjoy.